All right, let's talk about data. The data we're picking, how we're sourcing that data, and most of the time when we're talking about data selection, we're really just kind of referring to the downloading bulk operation files, downloading search reports, and that initial time frame or date range that you pick when downloading these files. So that date range is going to be extremely important, and it'll make or break an account. If you know that in some scenarios you should be using last 14 days, and other scenarios you should be using last 30 days. That'll make a huge difference if you can just get that right. So we're going to talk about how to think through a couple of key items so that when you're downloading those reports, you know exactly what date range you're going to be using. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about here is data confidence versus data relevance. You could think of this mainly as confidence equals volume and relevance equals recency, or how recent that data is. So if you're just let's just say you're trying to optimize your bids and you're trying to look at, how exactly things have performed this week currently. Maybe it's Wednesday and you're just looking at the Sunday through the Wednesday data because you're trying to be very, very recent, very relevant, very on point to the current trends. And so you download that sheet and you make all of your optimizations based off the past 3 days of data. Well, you're going to have that recency, but there's a good chance that a lot of the actual volume on your keywords, the clicks going across your account, aren't going to be there. You also have the sales reporting delays, the attribution delays in the ad console. So you're not going to have a lot of confidence in the actual validity and value of that data. Now, on the flip side, to kind of go to the other extreme, maybe with confidence, you're going to, we're recording this over in October. So maybe I want to download a whole entire year-to-date report that's going to have all of my clicks, all of my traffic, everything in there. We're talking millions of clicks of data that's going to be in there. And we're going to have a ton of confidence where if something's saying, it's averaging a 10% conversion rate over 10,000 clicks, we have pretty high confidence that moving forward, we're going to get around a 10% conversion rate on that keyword. However, we're missing out some of the relevancy here, some of that recency of the data that's a better indicator of those trends. Perhaps though we have really high confidence around those clicks, most of that happened in the first half of the year, maybe when it was warmer months and we're selling winter products. We're selling summer products, and as we head into the winter season, we've actually seen those trends declining with conversion rates. So we're not going to be able to see that trending movement on those longer time frames where we have a lot more confidence. We're not going to see the actual trends here. So when we're talking about confidence versus relevance, we'll just put some notes here. We're talking about volume. We're talking about big numbers. And when we're talking about relevance, we're talking about recency and trends. And another good thing here is maybe holidays, seasonality, that's going to play a big impact. So I always like to give the example of optimizing your bids on January 1st. What date range are you going to use? By default, a lot of people just like to say, last 30 days. They think that's a pretty good blend of confidence, still pretty relevant. But if you're, if it's, December 29th or 30th or January 1st, and you're optimizing based off the last 30 days of data, you have a good amount of numbers there, but the seasonality and the recency of moving forward into the first week of January compared to December's performance is way, way, way off. And chances are you're going to be setting your bids too high because they're based off data where conversion rates were elevated, where average order values were elevated. So in this example, you could actually, on January 1st, what I typically do is I'll usually use the data from December 24th, right where everything kind of starts to go down. And then I'll use that December 24th through January 1st, around a 7-8 day window, which is much smaller. So we're not going to have as much click volume and data confidence, but we're going to be much more on point with that recency. And then after you get, into that first week of January, now you can once again have a slightly longer date range. You can now look back at the past 14 days. So from December 24th through January 8th, and have a much better time selection for data that's going to have a little bit more confidence as time goes on, but remain relevant and recent. But those holidays, those seasonal events, immediately following Prime Day, that's a big one. Immediately after Prime Day, how do you decide what date range you're going to use for your next bid optimizations? Anything that's going to include Prime Day's data is going to be wrong. Sometimes even the ramp up to Prime Day might be wrong. So if it were me, if it's the middle of July, or if it's right after July and I'm trying to optimize, I would usually use June's data. Or in June, if I'm trying to go with pretty good data confidence. But I would be looking at June, or maybe you can even go May and June, depending on if you knew there were any, events or seasonality or deals going on then. But usually after a few days or the first week after Prime Day, you can then go back to that 7-day time frame, looking at performance directly following Prime Day, and start kind of going from, if Prime Day, let's just say, was on July 13th, and it's now July 21st, you could go from the 14th through the 21st, and then 1 week later from the 14th through the 28th, and so on. Something else you're going to want to keep in mind is during your date range when you're picking time, or when you're picking your time frame for your data, were there any products that were on deals? Maybe it wasn't even Prime Day, but maybe you had products that were on lightning deals, or maybe you had products that were going out of stock, or maybe you had different reviews come in that were negative. These are all the types of elements that aren't necessarily going to be reflected in the data to just jumping at you off the page, but you have to be factoring that in when you are picking your date range selection. The next core component to keep in mind is data aggregation versus data segmentation. So we'll talk about these. Now, you could think about it this way. Probably a really simple way to visualize this is imagine having one phrase match keyword with 10 clicks, but it was 10 different search terms. So 10 different search terms all triggered by one phrase match keyword. That one phrase match keyword has 10 clicks. All that search term data has been aggregated into one phrase match keyword. Or you could have broken that out and had 10 different keywords, each of those that got one click, and they were all exact match. So either 10 exact match keywords or one phrase match keyword. That's probably a good way to think through aggregation versus segmentation. A lot of this is going to be determined by your campaign structure. So we're going to be talking about that in this course as well, how to set up the most optimal campaign structure, how to be harvesting these keywords effectively. But you have to be keeping in mind when you're setting up your account, these components, how do you want to aggregate versus segment your data? Now, there's a couple of issues that happen with both over-aggregation as well as over-segmentation. But let's first talk about over-segmentation, because I think it's become increasingly popular where people will try to have these single keyword campaigns and perfect exact match keywords only, and there's never the same search term that could ever possibly appear in more than one campaign. And they try to keep it where basically every possible search term you could ever imagine on Amazon sits as an exact match keyword in their account, and they're controlling the bid on that. The issue with that is not a lot of these keywords, or even your own products, get a lot of volume. And we're kind of missing out on that confidence level again when you don't have that volume. And trying to optimize a keyword with one click and no sales is really difficult. Now, most people would just say, oh, that's a low visibility keyword. We should be increasing the bids on that keyword. But if you have tens of thousands of those little one-click non-converting keywords, those all add up really quickly. And just because you broke that data out and segmented it individually, so no individual keyword has a high ACoS or anything, all those get added up at the end of the day, and your total account spend and your total account ACoS is an aggregate of all those keywords combined. And that's where you're going to run into issues where you're going to see your total ACoS is way too high, and it's because you over-segmented and you don't really have enough data confidence on any individual one of those keywords because you over-segmented your account and you ran into an issue there. So what we like to do is we segment basically as much as we can into our account. We segment as deep as we can before we get to the point of losing actionable data. So we basically don't ever want to have any one item in our account, whether it's a keyword or a product ad, that's not getting at least a certain number of clicks each month. And how to determine what that number of clicks should be, we'll talk about that more later, but it's essentially going to be relative to your own account. So you got to be thinking through all of these issues. So an account that averages thousands of clicks a month is very different from an account that averages only a couple hundred clicks a month. So these are all things that you got to be thinking through. So over-segmenting is going to run you into issues when you have too small data on any individual item. On the flip side, over-aggregation. Think of it this way. If you take all of your products, all of your keywords, and you dump them all into one single ad group in one single campaign, you now have, and let's just say you got 10 products in there and you've got 100 keywords in there, and all of those are likely going to have a lot of data if you're spending several $1,000s a month on these campaigns or on this one campaign. So it's going to be very well aggregated. You're going to have no problem calculating what the proper bid is for any of those keywords because all of those keywords have a whole bunch of clicks on them. So it's going to be great. But you're never going to be able to know, for example, oh, this keyword is doing really well. Which product of mine is doing well in that keyword? Because when you have all those products in the same ad group as all those keywords, we can't actually get that one-to-one correlation between which keyword is doing well for which product or which search term is driving a sale for which product. So it's good for having that data confidence and being able to make informed decisions around bids or pausing keywords. But we lose a lot of specificity and ability to be exact and precise with our optimizations to get us a little bit better. So to make the point again, with aggregation, what we're going for here is similar to up here. We're going for volume, big numbers, big data that we do feel confident about. With segmentation, what we're going after is specificity or granularity with our data. And so I guess you could say that these, I guess in the pink or orange, whatever color that is, we're talking more about the date range selection. Are you going for a bigger date range that's going to give you more numbers, or a shorter, more recent time frame that's going to give you more relevant data? And then with the campaign structure and the way you're setting up everything, do you want to be grouping products, grouping keywords together in a way that's going to give you better volume for that same level of confidence? Or do you want to be breaking things out to be a bit more specific? Now, there's no right answer here. So we're not just saying you should always use 14 days or you should always use single product ad groups or single product campaigns. You got to think through each of these individually. I tell you that for myself, I have some accounts where we have campaigns broken out where each individual product has a ton of volume to it. Like I've got a client with 10 or 12 products. Each one of those has a ton of volume. So we can not only give them single product campaigns, but even break those campaigns into more segmentation around the types of keywords that we're targeting for those products. But on the flip side, I've got another account that has 10,000 SKUs that only spends $1,000 a month. It's a bit of a unique count, but in that scenario, we couldn't possibly have all of that $1,000 spread across, 10,000, 20,000 campaigns and having each campaign in a separate ad group or separate campaign. We have to consolidate it. We have to aggregate it in some way. And so for them, we actually have a bunch of products, similar designs within this style of merchandise that they're doing, grouped together in single ad groups so that we can bring that data together and get better volume so that we can make better informed decisions with all of our optimizations. So these are all the things you got to think through. When it comes to the aggregation segmentation, an analogy we kind of made up that we thought might be helpful is imagine you're trying to make peanut butter jelly sandwiches and you have unlimited bread. So you can use all the bread that you want in the world, but you have a limited amount of peanut butter and jelly. So the question is, how can you make the most possible peanut butter jelly sandwiches for you and your friends while preserving the quality of the flavor of those sandwiches? Now, if you aggregate the spread and you put a ton of peanut butter and jelly into each of your sandwiches, you're not going to be able to make very many sandwiches. So they're going to be great. You're going to have really high quality in terms of the flavor. But on the flip side, maybe you try to go really thin spreads and you can have a ton of sandwiches, but each of those individually are going to have much less flavor. So there's a balance there between maximizing the total number of sandwiches you can make while also preserving the quality and flavor. And so to bring that over here, it's like the quality and flavor is aggregating that data, having that high volume, and the segmentation is being able to just get a lot more individual data points to pull from and those levels of specificity. So you have to find the balance at the end of the day with both of these issues, and it's absolutely essential that you think critically through these data points, both when setting up your campaigns. It's going to be different for every account that you're managing, as well as picking the date ranges for all of your optimizations, which that's going to change on every iteration of bid optimizations, of keyword harvesting, of keyword negation. You're always going to be switching that. So make sure you're just thinking through all of these items, and you're going to be in a much better space with all of your optimizations.